Picking up on our last project where we made a knife handle for my World War II reenacting impression, the knife that I used was a kitchen knife that I converted to look like a hybrid between a fighting knife, camp knife, and a kitchen knife, handmade, all wrapped into one knife. Make sure to check out that video. Well, in this video project, we'll be building a knife sheath. Now, this knife sheath, I have 3 primary goals for it. Number 1, it needs to look like it's period appropriate for this impression. 2, I need it to be sturdy. I do not want it breaking on me, especially if I happen to fall on it. 3, I need it to hold the knife in. So while we're on the topic of 3s, we'll be using 3 primary ingredients for this knife sheath build. A oak pallet slat, some leather, and some copper house wire. Yes, you heard that right, copper house wiring. I'm not gonna spoil this project for you, so let's cut right to the project. See what I did there? So to start off with this project, we're starting actually with the first primary ingredient, which is this oak pallet slat. So I'm tracing out the knife, and we'll use this trace to cut in the shape in just a moment. So I'm using the fanciest tool you'll ever find in anybody's workshop, and that is an X-Acto knife, razor blade, or whatever you want to call it. And then I'm just following my tracing and just cutting, etching, so to speak, a line in there, trying to reduce the amount of splitting or chipping when I go in to actually carve out the pocket for the knife blade. As I'm using these wood chisels, the thing I need to watch for is gouging or making the pocket too deep, chipping, or splitting. So I don't want to split out my first attempt like I did on the knife handle project. That took a lot of extra time. Now, if you look at a knife blade, there's a taper to it, so I need to carve it actually to match that taper so it fits in there nice and snug. Skipping the gym today for my workshop. Well, I often don't go to the gym anyways. Shh, don't tell anyone. That's my secret. So as my second exercise in my workshop workout, I'll be using this hand planer to plane the surface so that there'll be a nice smooth surface to glue both sides of this sheath together. Now for the third exercise in this workout regime is using a handsaw to rip a board lengthwise. Yeah, there probably could have been a better way to do this, but well, I got an arm workout at least. It just might have took a few minutes or half an hour or so. Now for a rest, I'm gonna let the machine do the work for me here. Call it cheating or whatever you will. But I'm going to let the bandsaw cut out the profile of this knife. I'm going to cut out both sides. After all, I had to rip 2 boards by hand, not just the one that I showed you. Time for the glue up, adding glue around the edge. I'm actually using my finger because I need to put just enough glue on. I do not want to put in any extra because if it goes inside of the cavity where the knife is supposed to fit, it'll become too tight when the glue's dry, possibly if a puddle of glue dries. So I need to make sure I do not get any excess glue intrusion inside of the cavity. So that's why I'm using my finger to spread it and putting so little bit of glue in there, just enough. Now I'm clamping it up and well, I gotta wait, so I'm gonna let it set overnight. So a start to a new project day, well, testing to see if it fits, and it still does, yay! So now on to the rough shaping with, again, the hand planer, so day 2's workout, yahoo! I'm gonna get strong doing these projects. So I got one side roughly finished, and the other side still got to go. So I'm going to do a combination of sanding and hand planing to carve this into its shape. Yeah, this project has got my workbench a little bit on the dirty side, but here, after doing some shaping with the hand planer and then on the sander, I have this shape, which I'm pretty happy with. So now I just want to make a leather part that wraps around here and forms a loop to go around my belt, and I think I'm going to build a loop right into the leather as well to help hold the knife in so it won't accidentally fall out. Because I'll show you what my previous generation of knife sheath looked like. So here's the previous generation back when this knife had this knife handle. So make sure to check out that video where I made this knife handle. And as you can see, it fits in the sheath pretty well. The problem is it would fall out of that sheath pretty easily. And the leather here I used was rather thin and it was kind of floppy and kind of just hung all over the place. So I am going to make version 2.0 with the version 2.0 handle. Now this is feeling a lot smoother. Let's step it up a notch, and I'll use actually steel wool. I really like the finish steel wool usually gets me. So I'm just gonna use a little bit of this old steel wool, super fine steel wool, to work it down some. And I'm just gonna have to do a whole lot of this, and after a while it'll be really nice and smooth. Now time to move on to the closure and the leather. I'm experimenting with making a closure right here with some copper wire. You'll see how it goes in a little bit. I would highly suggest making a template of your design before you cut it out of your actual material, leather. I'm working on my third design. This one definitely did not work. This one would work, but I'm not sure if I like it. So I want another option. So I'm gonna make another template. Because what I discovered with this one is, while in theory it would look like it would work fine, this did not leave any material really to create a seam here without offsetting here, which looks weird. So taking what I learned from that experiment, I'm making an offset side with enough material for the seam. And I'll have to take this somehow and embed it underneath the leather right there. I'm gonna hot glue this because I just want a quick way to anchor this down, and then I'm also gonna sew it. Now the other tricky part I gotta add is I gotta add this right there, and I'm gonna have to sew right through it. Now I'm gonna use a super fancy punch, a nail, and I'm gonna drive some holes through here so I can sew it. Could definitely use one of those fancy punch things that make all the holes line up perfectly. But alas, I don't have one of those. Now on to sewing. I'm actually using some old cordage I got a long time ago online. It's actually meant for leather working. It's like wax coated cotton or something like that. I'm brainstorming now how to fit my prototype closure on. I'm gonna have to make a new one shortly, but I'm punching some holes in the leather, and well, we'll have to go from there. So to fit the closure in though, I have to bend this copper wire in such a way around the holes. You can't make it beforehand because it just won't fit through the holes. You'll see in a moment how this closure works. It's a little hard to film this and get this in shot, so I didn't get as many good shots of this bending process as I wanted. Okay, so what I did, punched 3 holes, bent the loop, slid the loop through the hole, and then I made this little tongue or whatever you want to call it that sticks up through here. So now that the knife is in the sheath, this strap will come across the top, go through this loop here, and there's going to be a hole in the strap here which will lock it in place there. And as you can see, that will also, this strap goes across the guard of the knife, keeping the knife in the sheath and keeps it from falling out. So the weird thing I think I'm going to need to do is, you can see it's lifting off the wood there. I may recess the wood a little bit, like carve a little, gouge out a little section to be able to house the buckle part. I'm just going to remove just a little bit of the material, which feels so wrong after going to all that work to make this. So I'm not going to do the scary part, and I'm going to glue the leather to the wood. I'm going to use hot glue again because it seems to do really well with wood and leather. Okay, now the exciting part for all of those of us who do not have patience, and that is waiting for the hot glue gun to get hot enough. So you can see how there's so much material buildup here, which will be kind of awkward around the knife handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually build out the material a little bit and add it right here. So I sanded the finished section of the leather just to rough it up a little bit more so it holds the glue better, and I'm going to just glue this all down. So once again, this part is just acting just as a spacer alone. Now that we have it prepped and glue on the leather, I'm putting down the actual wood knife sheath part. I was nervous about this because the whole time I was concerned I'd glued in backwards because I've done stuff like that before, but I actually got it in right this time, so I was like, woohoo, way to go me! Now I'm gluing on the front as well, and it's getting close to being done. So now for the fun of doing that tab, which I will glue, I'm gonna grab clamps real quick. So again, this glue performs 2 things. It helps hold the leather together, and it holds it in place while I'm sewing as well. So instead of using a clamp, I'm using a vice grip. It turned out to be a lot easier. I punched a bunch of these holes off camera. Now it's time to sew this seam. Sewing seams through leather is surprisingly difficult, especially if your holes don't line up perfectly. So spending maybe a little bit of extra time punching the holes better might have in the long run saved time. Now for the last hole to be punched, the hole in the strap. And finally you can see how the closure works, sliding the leather through the loop and hooking it into place. Now a moment I've been waiting for since I started forming this piece out of wood, staining it to see what it finally looks like. This is possibly one of my favorite parts of this project. And here is the entire finished product. I'm actually filming both the intro and the outro quite a while after finishing this project, as I used it in a few reenactments. It's held up well. There's a tiny bit of rust that got on the blade. I did oil this up really well though after the last reenactment. Really happy with this. I used this actually a decent amount for even leatherworking projects inside the tent at the reenactment. Here's the knife sheath as well. You can actually see it's fit to the belt now and being carried on the belt. And the loop. So I did bend the copper accidentally at some point. I don't know quite how. Maybe something hit it, or I don't know. So that is one of the downfalls of using the copper, though I really like the color of the copper. Maybe steel would be a better option, but I really like having that, again, as I said, the color of it. So this concludes the two-part series on this knife project, making the knife handle and the knife sheath. Make sure to subscribe, as I do have other projects coming out, other things coming out shortly. I have some plans also for the month of December, so we'll see what comes out for that. But the next thing that I'm going to be working on editing is footage from another reenacting project, and that was making a camp stove out of some plate steel for my tent, just to add a little bit of heat for my last reenactment, as it was 30 degrees in the morning and I wanted to stay warm. So subscribe and I'll see you in future videos.